Wars. There is another approach to them. It is a different approach that the media does not talk about. Before I tell you what that approach is, I want to point out a few things. First, why killing or harming people for anti-war ideas is stupid. For example, Gandhi was killed for applying anti-war ideas, and the killer may not have been just some random madman, but rather a convinced fanatic. John Lennon was probably also killed for anti-war ideas, and again, it looked as though some madman acted entirely on his own. Even Jesus was targeted for such ideas, and many others as well. First of all, the teachings of Jesus, Gandhi, Lenin's ideas, and those of others were not stopped by their murders or attempted murders. On the contrary, they may even have grown stronger. Killing such people to stop the spread of these ideas is therefore not only foolish, but perhaps even counterproductive. Murdering individual spreaders of such ideas will not stop the spread of those ideas, because no one can kill every person who holds them, and even if they could, the ideas would arise again in others. This is a matter of collective consciousness, not individual minds. These ideas seem to emerge within people, and if one person dies, they emerge in another, and so on. It cannot be stopped. Moreover, all ideas, even opposing ones, can serve as a challenge or test for maintaining one's state of awareness, and therefore, even those who disagree with them can make use of them. And if someone seeks suffering through war, then they should realize that there are so many ways to suffer individually that there is really no need to drag others into it. Additionally, those who order assassinations always make sure that the paid killer either dies quickly afterward, for example, is executed or conveniently killed, or remains under such strict protection in prison that once released, almost no one will truly believe them anymore. The person ordering the murder wants to ensure that the assassin cannot expose them and say that they were paid to do it. Assassins, for a few thousand euros that they often will not even have time to spend, end up being destroyed either by supporters of the murdered person's ideas, by the police, by the victim's acquaintances, by the intended victim themselves, or simply by the very person who ordered the murder. And if they truly believe they will remain free, then eventually severe guilt, psychological suffering, and similar consequences will follow anyway. Research on former soldiers who killed on battlefields also points to this. Many die prematurely from psychological trauma alone. Second, it is important to realize that every war is global. Almost everyone knows that war causes suffering. It negatively affects water, air, soil, and all living beings, both directly and indirectly. War is therefore not only about directly murdering and killing people, but also about enormous pollution of water, air, and soil, and the killing of other living creatures. War causes suffering for people and other beings even in the future. Therefore, the creators of war and its supporters inevitably suffer greatly as well, and they suffer gradually through drinking contaminated water, breathing contaminated air, eating contaminated food that grew in contaminated soil and was irrigated with contaminated water in contaminated air, or by eating the bodies of animals that consumed contaminated plants, drank contaminated water, and breathed contaminated air. What few people realize is that war is never truly local. It always concerns the entire planet, and therefore all people. There are no real borders for contaminated air and water. Contaminated plants and animals are also exported to many distant countries around the world. Third, although people generally agree that war is bad, some believe it is necessary. And those who think it is necessary logically divide into two sides. One side wants one party in the conflict to win, while the other side wants the opposing party to win. Both sides want to use war itself to stop war. That is similar to trying to stop negativity in a household by fighting it with one's own negativity. We already know the result of that. Another approach to wars is the approach of nonviolent resistance. That is to say, to not respond to negativity with more negativity. Or we can name it as a principle of non-resistance to evil by force. I would not mention this approach here if it were not supported mainly by these two facts. First, it was taught by perhaps the best-known person in Europe, America, and Australia. At the time of his teaching, this person was probably the most enlightened human being walking the planet, and even compared to other enlightened figures of the past and future, he stood out as though he had been enlightened since birth. It is therefore probably reasonable to consider his opinion. Second, this method has also been successfully verified many times throughout history, including directly in military conflicts. One example, probably the most famous, applied by Nobel Prize winner Gandhi, will be mentioned later. Regarding point 1, that enlightened and very wise person who still has many followers today expressed the above opinion quite clearly, according to Matthew. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you not to oppose wickedness, evil, but whoever strikes the right side of your cheek, turn to him the other also. And to the one wanting to sue you and take your shirt, give up to him your coat also. In other words, he clearly says that what was taught about revenge in the Old Testament is not good. So let us choose. Will we believe the Old Testament or the New Testament? Yes, to people who only see things on the surface, it sounds crazy. What is he really saying? He says, if somebody takes your coat, give him your shirt too. If he takes your coat, maybe he's not even truly rude. Maybe he wanted your shirt too, but couldn't take it. A polite thief. So give him your shirt as well, and let the whole thing be finished. If somebody slaps you on the face, maybe there's still some violence left inside him. Let him be free from it. Offer the other cheek too, so the violence can end completely, and so both of you can be free. Otherwise, he will come back. So let it end fully and be closed. What he's saying actually makes complete sense, but to unwise people it sounds insane. He proposes reducing negativity within a person by not creating more negativity. He demonstrated this when, after the Last Supper, Peter wanted to defend him with a sword, or when, in captivity, they covered his eyes, slapped him, and mocked him, telling him to guess who had struck him. As for interpretation, I think his reactions are described quite clearly in the New Testament. This can often be observed in animals as well. A wolf cornered by a pack of wolves lowers its tail and does not attack, so as not to increase the aggressiveness of the attacking wolves through resonance with its own aggression. Negativity within us resonates with negativity in others. The same applies to love. Love within us resonates with the love of others, as I described in my previous videos. And resonance increases amplitude or intensity. Incidentally, this also appears in the teachings of Eastern enlightened figures such as Lao Tzu, Patanjali, Mahavira, Siddhartha Gautama, and others. Physics also teaches something similar through the law of action and reaction. With the same force that we act upon another person, that person acts upon us immediately. The force simply has the opposite direction, but exactly the same magnitude. So what happens if I exert the force of negativity upon another person? Eastern teachings speak about the sequence of action and reaction, if you wish, karma, about how one negative act gives rise to another, which then causes yet another, and so on. We can stop this by responding to negative acts with positivity and love. Incidentally, something almost identical was said by another very famous European, Albert Einstein. Again, I chose someone about whom few people would object, so it is worthwhile to reflect on what he publicly said. Albert Einstein reportedly said this publicly: "You cannot solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that created it." Or as Tolstoy writes, "Satan cannot be cast out by Satan, error cannot be corrected by error, and evil cannot be defeated by evil." So if war-loving French forces defeated Germany in World War I while in a negative state of consciousness, then Germany could not effectively solve that defeat, that problem, through another negative approach. They should have used a different state of consciousness, a positive one, instead of another war. But they chose another war, and we know how that ended. Now, let us move to the second point. Because at this stage, many of you are probably thinking, fine, but this does not always work, and we must defend ourselves against attack. That is reality. Almost no one denies that. The question is whether it is more effective to defend oneself through negativity or through positivity and love. A bit from antiquity. Ancient Tai Chi masters, Kung Fu masters, samurai, and many other great warriors understood this clearly. They taught that it is more effective to defend oneself calmly and not attack, merely using the opponent's attack to defeat the opponent. Someone will probably say, fine, but this would not help if the opponent used weapons of mass destruction. Let's talk about application of the nonviolent approach in past wars. Let us discuss a proven, successful application of the principle of not fighting negativity with negativity, using the example of a modern conflict that could essentially be described as war. In practice, it was demonstrated, for example, by Nobel Peace Prize winner Mahatma Gandhi. During his lifetime, the British Empire sought to dominate and occupy India. Even though the British did not attack with their full military force, they still used firearms against the Indians to enforce obedience. And Mahatma Gandhi had enough courage to try the method advocated by Eastern Enlightened teachers, namely, not resisting negativity with more negativity. He reportedly asked Leo Tolstoy for advice on how to implement this in practice. Tolstoy wrote them the famous letter, A Letter to a Hindu. The result was that, under Gandhi's leadership, the Indian people resisted British domination not through violence, but through what is called nonviolent resistance. This method has also been used successfully many other times throughout history. See, for example, the nonviolent resistance page on Wikipedia. As you read this, I can mention, for the sake of objectivity, that even such an approach may involve several deaths. Journalist Webb Miller described the British response in India as follows. In complete silence, the Gandhi men drew up and halted 100 yards from the stockade. A picked column advanced from the crowd, waded the ditches, and approached the barbed wire stockade. At a word of command, scores of native policemen rushed upon the advancing marchers and rained blows on their heads with their steel-shot lathis, long bamboo sticks. Not one of the marchers even raised an arm to fend off blows. They went down like 10 pins. From where I stood, I heard the sickening whack of the clubs on unprotected skulls. Those struck down fell sprawling, unconscious, or writhing with fractured skulls or broken shoulders. Then, when the soldiers saw that Gandhi's people were not defending themselves at all, not even by shouting, they stopped. The result of that movement was that the British left, while India remained essentially as intact as it had been before their arrival. The same cannot be said, for example, about present-day Ukraine. From the last quoted passage, it follows that, when using the principle of not responding to negativity with more negativity, many victims may fall, many would say unnecessarily. However, let us look at the current war in Ukraine. This principle is not being used there, and the result is vastly more casualties and an almost completely devastated country. In his book, The Kingdom of Heaven is Within You, Leo Tolstoy mentions thousands of other people in modern history who supported the principle of nonviolent resistance. These included the American Quakers, William Lloyd Garrison, the American Adin Ballou, the Czech thinker Chelchitsky, author of The Net of Faith, German Mennonites, Bogomils, Paulicians, Diamond, author of On War, Daniel Musser, Waldensians, Albigensians, and many others. More recently, there were figures such as Malala Yousafzai, winner of the 2014 Nobel Peace Prize, Mahatma Gandhi, John Lennon, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, and many others. When India was occupied by the British Empire, many may have believed that it was necessary to destroy the British. Otherwise, they would gradually enslave not only India, but other countries as well. Yet, through the use of nonviolent resistance, this did not happen. On the contrary, the British never attacked India again afterward, and apparently are not even attempting to do so now. India remained essentially preserved. Many people are probably offended by the presentation of this perspective on responding to war. Some perhaps believe it threatens their profits from weapons sales, from the subsequent reconstruction of destroyed countries, or threatens their perceived power, and so on. With war, they may gain more money and feel more important, but then they live among people suffering greatly, among unhappy people, and within a polluted environment. That pollution and suffering spread throughout the entire world. not to mention their own psychological state. Ultimately, such people are therefore unhappier, despite having more money and so-called power than they would be without war and with less money. Thus, applying this nonviolent perspective on war apparently helps everyone. Without war, even those who perpetuate war would live better. It appears that, according to this nonviolent perspective on war, it is better to seemingly surrender and then resist nonviolently than to heroically resist through negativity and cause far greater destruction. This principle naturally also applies to political rivalry, to ordinary conflicts between people, and so on. Not responding to negativity with negativity is not easy, but it brings long-term benefit. Releasing tons and tons of toxins into Ukraine and into other countries as a consequence of war, all for the sake of making a mark on the wall that we won, is madness. And who can guarantee that it would be the final victory? Is not victory through weapons merely a Pyrrhic victory? Ukrainians can defeat Russians only through love, just as Indians, under Gandhi's leadership, defeated the superpower Great Britain. And that, incidentally, would be a far, far greater victory. The important thing, therefore, is to strive for an immediate cessation of fighting, even at the cost of temporary occupation of Ukrainian territory by another state. Because of ego and a piece of territory, where mostly Russians already live, people have destroyed much larger parts of the entire country for many future generations of Ukrainians who will live there after the war. Long after the war, people there will still walk through fields, meadows, and forests in fear of stepping on mines, and they will continue eating food and drinking water contaminated by war. So is it really worth some so-called victory? Does anyone truly believe that someone like Jesus was mistaken in his approach toward aggressors? Final victory exists only through the path of love. Write in the comments what you think about it.